It was a chilly January day in 2013 when Sarah Ellis heard a knock on her door. It was her 79th birthday, but she didn't feel like celebrating. In fact, she hadn't felt like celebrating at all in the last 26 years. Well, at least not since her teenage daughter, Emily, was found murdered in October 1985. Her killer was never caught. When 79-year-old Sarah opened the door, she was greeted by a police officer. This sight alone was triggering for her, as she'd been greeted similarly by an officer when her daughter's body was found, discarded like trash all those years earlier. But this time the officer wasn't delivering terrible news. Instead, he had just 3 words to say. And no, it wasn't "Happy birthday, Sarah," no. It was 3 words she waited nearly 30 years to hear: "We got him." Intro Amanda Ellis, better known by her nickname Emily, was born in Portland, Oregon. Emily was a combination of athletic and smart. Emily was a cheerleader at Glacier Peak High School, and all of her teachers loved her. Emily participated in track and softball as well. After high school, she enrolled in Western Oregon University, and she loved it there. She was the type of person who would help any and everyone. Emily's mom, Sarah, defined her as a go-getter. She wanted to try everything, and she wanted to be the best at everything she did. At the time of the case, Emily, a freshman in college, was at home in Deming, Washington, a small rural community in Skagit County, for Thanksgiving. Her family got together for the holidays every year so that they could catch up and share stories about what they'd been up to since their last Thanksgiving, a pretty typical tradition for many of us. Well, the day after, when everyone had already either left or begun loading up to head back home, Emily decided it was time to get back to business as usual, and she hopped right back into her daily routine. It was October 20th, 1985, when 18-year-old Emily went for a jog in her neighborhood. Emily loved jogging and running, and she was usually accompanied by her pet dog, a German shepherd named Luna. And this was a time that the two looked forward to almost every single day. Emily was seen by a few people, including a man in a pickup truck, who saw her running down the road with Luna. The road was relatively safe, and as you normally hear in a lot of these cases, crime was a rarity. It was 1985. People didn't have security cameras, and the concept of locking their doors was foreign to them. Emily jogged down the same path many times, but just because nothing had happened before doesn't mean that it won't ever happen. And sadly, this jog would be Emily's last, because after several hours had passed by, Emily's parents realized something. Emily never made it home. Emily never came home. This was extremely alarming for Emily's family. Emily was usually always on time, with Luna accompanying her. It wasn't like she made plans out of the blue and took Luna with her. Besides, she was in her running clothes. Surely she would come home and change into something more appropriate if she were meeting someone. Emily would always tell her parents if she was going somewhere. But hours had passed by and there was no sign of Emily. That was when Emily's family and loved ones began panicking. This was totally unlike Emily, and they needed to find her before it was too late. While Emily's friends and family were out looking for her, they saw something in the distance. They weren't quite sure what it was at first, but as they drew nearer, they realized what they'd found. A German shepherd was prancing its way back home. It was Luna, but she was alone. This was not a good sign. Why would Luna come back home alone? And where was Emily? The poor dog was dehydrated and tired, and it was clear that something bad had happened. Luna was edgy and very nervous-looking, and so were Emily's loved ones. That was the moment when the detectives got involved, and 18-year-old Amanda Ellis was finally reported missing. The investigation. Emily's search was huge and sensational. No one thought that something bad could happen in the quiet and quaint town of Deming, but it did, and now the whole community was shaken up. Girls and women were scared of walking the streets even in broad daylight. Parents were worried sick for their kids, and even watching them leave for school or to play with their friends down the street made them uneasy. The detectives got to work right away. Emily was definitely not a runaway. She went out for a jog. She was in her running clothes and blue sneakers. Her belongings, cash, and everything important were at home. So she couldn't have run away unprepared. So the police decided to search the route that Emily normally took. It was a regular road, but it had patches of thickly wooded areas at a distance. It was also quite remote, like you wouldn't see people or cars for miles, but it was pretty normal for a small rural community like Deming. The search for Emily was long, but the police, as well as the community, didn't give up. And 3 days into Emily's disappearance, they found something. Detective Mike Thompson was leading the search team for Emily, and when he reached Skagit River, which is about 4 miles away from where Emily was jogging, on October 23, 1985, he looked at the water and saw something out of the ordinary. He was sure that he saw a glimpse of blue in the water, and he knew that it wasn't his eyes playing tricks on him. He got closer to the weird blue thing sticking out from under the water, and that was when his heart sank. He was looking at a pair of sneakers, but it wasn't just a pair of sneakers. Someone was wearing those sneakers and said someone was submerged in water in the middle of this river. When Detective Thompson dragged the mass out of the water, he was shocked to see a young woman's disrobed and lifeless body. He didn't need any identification to know that he was looking at the lifeless and cold body of 18-year-old Emily Ellis. What everyone was dreading tragically came true. They were no longer dealing with a missing persons case. This was now a homicide investigation, and they needed to find the culprit as soon as possible. But that would be easier said than done. Emily's body was taken for forensic examination and an autopsy, and it revealed tragic results and was a terrifying picture of what Emily endured before she lost her life. Emily lost her life by drowning, and unfortunately, she was taken advantage of beforehand. This wasn't a murder. This was a full-blown tragedy. She had several defensive wounds on her body as well as scratches, which the investigators believed she sustained when she tried to run away from her assailant and got caught in thick and thorny raspberry bushes. Unidentified male DNA was found on Emily's body, but the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now to catch the murderer with just that. The detectives needed more information about Emily and who she was with during her final moments. Thar dead end. The discovery of Emily's body was the start of a long investigation with hundreds and hundreds of tips, confusion, dead ends, and a soul-crushing 3 decades of trying to find answers for Emily's inexplicable murder. The investigators started with people who were close to Emily. Any male friends, admirers, and even her boyfriend at the time, Dave. The detectives had to go through all the possibilities before they could move on to the next person of interest. But it was all in vain. In total, about 40 men all over Deming gave their DNA to help investigators match the sample found on Emily's body, but nothing promising came up. There were also various tips coming in every day. Some people claimed that a local drifter had abducted Emily. Some said that they saw Emily earlier that day before she went missing. But still, nothing useful ever came up. The police checked every single lead. It wasn't like they had much choice. They had very little to go by in the investigation, so tips and witness statements were all that they had at the time. They were, quite literally, grasping at straws. Any slight inkling of a lead, they pursued it to its very end. But it was beginning to feel like their efforts would never be enough. The killer left virtually nothing behind, so without some sort of witness statement or some sort of confession, the chances of finding Emily's killer, well, it wasn't looking good. A reward of $35,000 was set up for any leads in making a successful arrest of the perpetrator, but even that led the detectives nowhere. Emily's case was hitting one dead end after another. If the promise of a life-changing $35,000 wasn't enough to get someone to come forward, then what would it take? Police were at a loss as to how to proceed from here. They couldn't just let the case go cold. There was far too much riding on this. The safety of the local townspeople being the main thing. There were many leads in Emily's case, almost too many to count, but they all led nowhere. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, and Emily's case, unfortunately, went cold. But it wasn't forgotten. It could never be. It was such a tragic and shocking incident that the whole community remembered it for decades. But without any promising or believable leads, the investigation died down. Emily's case had gone cold for over 2 decades. But in July 2009, everything changed. Police had been begging for answers for well over 20 years at this point, and on a warm July afternoon, They'd finally get the answers they were looking for when two women, completely out of the blue, walked into the police station with some information that would blow this case wide open. New lead after decades. It was July 2009 when the investigators were approached by two mothers who lived near Everett, Washington, and they just had this weird feeling that they couldn't shake off. It all started with a day out at Cultus Lake water slides. Jessica Harlan and Kelly Mitchell were sitting on the grass, chatting with one another as they watched their kids play in the water and slide down the slippery water slides. Even though Emily's murder was 2 decades old, it was still the talk of the town. People would look back on that haunting day and get goosebumps because Emily's case was still unsolved after all this time, and no one had been caught yet. That was until the two women approached the police with a very strange story. They were thinking back on the day that Emily disappeared all those years ago, and they remembered one very strange occurrence they'd both had with a suspicious man. Both women had spoken with this man in 2 separate instances, with these 2 conversations taking place before and after Emily's murder, but the incidents left the women feeling very shaky, and they just had a hunch about this eccentric and weird man. His name was Robert Hayes, and he was a student at Glacier Peak High School back then, just as these 2 women had been. Kelly remembered Robert knocking on her door one night a few years after Emily's murder. She was married at the time, and she was home alone with her baby while her husband was away for work. Kelly was surprised to see Robert at such an odd hour of the evening. Heck, she was a bit shocked to see him at all. He looked disheveled, and he requested to use her phone to make a call. Kelly let him in, but soon realized that the phone call was just an excuse. He just wanted inside Kelly's home. He leisurely walked around the house, from the kitchen up to the bedroom, and when he finally turned around to face Kelly, she knew in her gut that she was in trouble. After all these years had passed since high school, Robert proclaimed his love for her and expressed his desire to be with her. I guess he must have missed the fact that Kelly was now married and has a child, even though the home had been filled with photos of Kelly and her husband, as well as their new baby. Whatever this was, Kelly was disgusted and very uncomfortable during this exchange, and she threatened to call the cops on Robert if he didn't leave. She was in so much shock that she didn't even remember how she got Robert to leave her house, but luckily he did, and Kelly was unharmed, albeit extremely scared and uncomfortable. I mean, can you blame her? She was all alone in her house with a baby, and this creepy dude thought that this was the perfect time to express his feelings for her. The whole thing was just so bizarre, it didn't make any sense. Well, after hearing Kelly's story, Jessica shared her own story. She had an interaction of her own with none other than Robert Hayes. Jessica's incident occurred right before Emily's murder, when she was 15 and Robert was 21. Jessica was driving home from a softball game with Robert and another young man named Sam. She remembered Robert staring intensely at her to the point where he, out of nowhere, aggressively complimented her eyes. If that wasn't enough, he then caressed Jessica's bare knee with a pen, which just about made the poor girl turn inside out. She was repulsed by this man, but he was clearly trying to make a move. After this, she deliberately avoided Robert because, spoiler alert, he was a creep. Well, all this time later, the two women, years and years after Emily's attack and murder, were hit with a feeling. Could Robert Hayes be behind Emily's murder? Was it possible? They didn't have any specific reason to suspect Robert would be capable of such a thing, other than the fact that he was gross and happened to be in the area at the time. But something about him, they just couldn't push the idea out of their minds. The women felt responsible to at least say something. They wanted to know whether Robert was the culprit or not. It was for their peace of mind, if anything. If Robert was somehow responsible for Emily's murder, then they wanted to see this man face the consequences. So, they reached out to the investigators on Emily's case, and when they heard the name Robert Hayes, it was safe to say that they were floored. The murderer, Robert Hayes, was now on the detectives' radar. Aside from being a Deming resident, Robert actually lived close to Emily. 3 miles away to be exact, and to make things even more eerie, his house was along Emily's usual running route. So, he would have easily seen her running that day, and investigators wanted to talk to him to see if he remembered anything unusual about that day. For some reason, Robert was never on the police's radar during Emily's investigation, at least not until now. They didn't even take his DNA at the time of mass testing. But the detectives had a good reason for not suspecting Robert. He was your typical Mr. Nice Guy. He kept to himself. He and his family were well liked in the community, and as of present, he was married with 3 children and worked as a delivery driver. Well, when the police knocked on Robert's door in 2009, he answered, and when the detectives asked about Amanda Ellis, he didn't even remember her. Now, this was shocking to the police. As I said, Emily's case was anything but forgettable. Even after all these years passed by, her case was still that talk of the town. You couldn't possibly live in Deming and not remember. It just wasn't possible. Everyone remembered what tragedy befell the Ellis home, even after years had passed, so to see Robert trying his hardest to remember Emily was a red flag for the police. Heck, even people who weren't born when the crime took place very clearly knew the case. Robert's short-term amnesia finally subsided, and he faintly remembered her as the girl found in the river. He was very detached and emotionless, and wasn't the least bit bothered about the young woman losing her life like that. The investigators also asked Robert if he was ever in a relationship with Emily at any point before her murder. Robert thought long and hard before finally answering that he wasn't. He flat out denied being in any sort of physical or romantic relationship with Emily. Just remember this bit, because it comes back up. Well, after this interaction, the detectives asked for his DNA, but Robert refused. He reasoned with the police that he wasn't comfortable giving his DNA because he didn't want to get framed for a crime he didn't commit. Again, this was weird to the police. Sure, he wasn't required to give his DNA. But if he had nothing to hide, then why would he be so defensive? Well, the detectives decided to leave Robert be for now. But they tracked his every move. If Robert wasn't going to hand over his DNA willingly, then the investigators would take it by themselves, one way or another. Robert, growing up, was defined as a loner, but when he reached adolescence, he became extremely angry, erratic, and emotional. He wasn't social, and after a nasty breakup with his girlfriend, which escalated with him threatening to end his life, Robert developed an inexplicable resentment towards women. Robert eventually married a woman named Lisa, and her life basically went to shreds right tying the knot. Robert showed his true colors to Lisa, emotionally and mentally abusing her and making her miserable. But since Lisa had nowhere to go, she put up with Robert's terrible behavior and abuse. Interestingly, Robert married Lisa just a few weeks following Emily's murder. The detectives were sure that Robert could be their guy, but to be 100% certain, they needed that DNA sample. Luckily, someone came to the police's aid. It was Robert's boss, a woman named Sue Carter. She agreed to cooperate with the police to help retrieve Robert's DNA. So, from that point on, Sue loomed over an unsuspecting Robert, and one day, 3 months later, she saw her chance. Robert was drinking a can of Pepsi, and he threw the can away in the trash. Robert was feeling generous that day because he also drank from a plastic cup and threw that in the trash, too. Sue saw this as a golden opportunity, and she pounced on the trash like it was a treasure waiting to be claimed. She gave all of these things to the police. They ran tests, and what would you know? Robert's DNA matched the male DNA found on Emily from over 24 years ago. Robert didn't have any reason to have his DNA all over Emily's body, unless he was the one who attacked and murdered her. And well, the detectives believed that too. So, 48-year-old Robert Hayes was ultimately arrested in January 2013, almost 3 decades after Emily was murdered. He was charged with kidnapping, assault, and murder. Emily's mom, Sarah, was given the news on her birthday, and let's just say that she got the best birthday present of her entire life. I mean, can you imagine being in Sarah's shoes, waiting for 26 years to finally see your daughter's murderer in handcuffs? 26 years is a lot, even for the strongest of people, and without sugarcoating anything, Sarah did lose hope at times. She was certain that Emily's murder would make the long list of the nation's cold cases, but thankfully that didn't happen. Emily and her family were about to get justice. But not before Robert faced trial, because you guessed it, he pleaded not guilty. The trial for Emily's murder was held 26 years following the actual crime, which is just insane, And instead of owning up to taking an 18-year-old young woman's life, Robert played the most unexpected card. And let me warn you, it will make your blood boil. The sentencing at Robert's trial, the detectives argued that Emily was abducted by Robert, who saw her through his window, maybe even daily. It is believed that he subdued her by striking her on the head when she was jogging, and it is believed that he even attacked the poor dog, Luna, too. Robert then took her 4 miles away from her jogging trail, where he took advantage of her. The prosecution is certain that Emily fought for her life and even managed to escape at one point, but he eventually and tragically overpowered her. And in the end, he took her life underwater and left a lifeless Emily in the middle of the river, like she meant nothing, tossed aside like an empty Pepsi can. Robert's DNA on Emily's body is enough proof that he was the one behind Emily's sudden and savage attack. There is no way around this. But Robert's defense dropped a bombshell, which honestly no one expected. And that was the fact that Robert and Emily were in a secret relationship at the time of Emily's murder. And they met up frequently for casual physical relations, which explains Robert's DNA on Emily's body and why she jogged that specific route each day. This disgusting man will do anything to free himself from the hands of the law. He truly believed he can slander Emily's like this and get away with murder scot-free. Well, Robert was in for a surprise because he didn't plan his story well enough. Remember when the police first talked to Robert in 2009? When he was having such a hard time remembering who Emily was and how he swore up and down that they had never been in a physical relationship before. Well, it was time for Robert to eat his words, because he was obviously caught in a lie. He had a hard time remembering his apparent lover, because the affair never happened. Robert did all of this to save his skin and give the grieving family even more pain. This guy is a piece of work. No evidence could corroborate Robert's wild version of events. No phone calls, no mutual friends, no being seen together anywhere. Nothing. Emily and Robert were strangers. In the end, Lisa, Robert's ex-wife, also testified, and her statement was pretty much the blow that sank Robert's ship. Lisa testified that she heard Robert pleading with his mom to save him by telling the detectives that it was Robert's dad who murdered Emily. It takes a lot for anyone to throw their own father under the bus, but this guy exceeds all extremes in the worst possible way. If that wasn't enough, Robert also tried to get his brother on his side by slandering Emily even more. Robert's brother, Jim, also took the stand and testified that Robert told him in 2011 that he was in a physical relationship with Emily before she was murdered. But there's more. Robert wanted Jim to tell the police that Emily was also physically involved with Jim. Robert basically wanted to paint Emily as a two-timer, just to slander her name and turn the whole case into a confusing mess. But in the end, on June 12, 2015, the jury came back with a verdict: the aftermath. Robert Hayes was found guilty on all charges. The courtroom broke out in tears of relief and happiness. This was 30 years' worth of investigation, back and forth, and so much pain and stress, but it was all worth it. Robert was sentenced to 25 years in prison, which was the maximum sentence in this case, because he wasn't charged with premeditated murder. This may still be long enough to ensure that he never sees the light of day again. The way this case unfolded, I'm sure a lot of us thought that it would stay a cold case forever, stuck in time with no answers, no closure, and seesawing between hope and despair. But luckily, thanks to the investigators who didn't let Emily and her family down, this case was finally closed, and the perpetrator is now behind bars. Truthfully, it was largely thanks to Robert's manager, Sue, who put her own safety on the line to help the detectives gather DNA evidence. It was also thanks to the two women, Jessica and Kelly, who had that aha light bulb moment and decided to talk to the police about Robert's involvement, his skin-crawling behavior, and antics. It was thanks to Special Prosecutor Paul Anderson, who retired after 42 years of service in courthouses, but he came back and led Emily's case and eventually won in the end. It was thanks to the community, who didn't let Emily's memory die with time. To the contrary, her case only got more potent with time, and this was what led to the case finally getting closed. But most of all, it was the resilience and determination of the Ellis family, who, even after 3 decades, continued pressing for answers. Emily didn't deserve to have her life ended abruptly like this. She had so much to look forward to, dreams to accomplish, and many pages to turn in the different chapters of her life. But at the end of the day, we can't spend our time caught up in what could have been. The main thing that matters is that this man is locked away in prison, and he will never be able to hurt one single soul ever again. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Brian Hale and Sandy Fletcher. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's a great way to support the channel and help out. I really appreciate those of you who've decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link in the description. Don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also available, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It is totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Alex Reed, and I will catch you guys in the next one.